Now, I remember just a few days ago, just last week, we talked about Kimmel and Rodgers. And I knew that you were trying to hold back your comments. This week will not be like that. Colin, go right ahead.
Yeah, so we talked about it a bit last week, but stuff was a lot more up in the air last week. Stuff is pretty settled now that we're recording this on Wednesday night. Of course, more could come out. More will come out. We'll see if lawsuits happen. But for those who don't know, in his weekly appearance last week on the Pat McAfee show, Aaron Rodgers implied that Jimmy Kimmel was a pedophile and said that Kimmel would be on the Epstein list. This accusation, of course, came with no evidence whatsoever, but McAfee, in typical McAfee fashion, he just laughed it off like it was some big joke. But Kimmel naturally didn't take it as a joke and rightfully threatened to sue Rodgers if he continued the lie. And as we mentioned earlier, some Epstein documents, they were released last week, though we believe that there are more to come, and Kimmel's name did not appear on any of these Epstein documents. Now, presumably because McAfee's show is on ESPN, which is owned by Disney, the same company that owns ABC, which is where Kimmel's show is, McAfee gave a apology the next day, came off as extremely insincere. He just said it was trash talk. Aaron Rodgers was just trash talking. He also trashed a powerful ESPN executive for trying to sabotage the show. Of course, ESPN essentially gave Pat McAfee full creative control over the show. It's more like a licensing agreement that Pat McAfee has with ESPN. Get into that a bit more in a minute. But to state the obvious, calling somebody a pedophile is not trash talk, Charlie. Rodgers is somebody with a lot of influence, a lot more influence than he has. So when he makes a comment like that, that can really damage somebody's reputation as well as like put Kimmel and his family in danger. He's already mentioned on his show that his wife and his young kids, they're I believe like 8 and 6, have heard about this. It really does have an effect. A lot of people, like I said, take Aaron Rodgers seriously. They shouldn't, but they do. And in the wake of this, when the Epstein documents were released, there were people photoshopping Kimmel's name into the documents and spreading them around online. So, Charlie, it would seem to me the case for defamation is pretty clear-cut. But that brings us to this week, when, for whatever reason, ESPN, they still thought it would be this okay thing to allow Rodgers to appear once again on the Pat McAfee show, as he's done every week this NFL season, even though Rodgers has been doing nothing this NFL season because he got injured the first week of the season and kept promising a return that never happened. So, Rodgers appeared. He had been promising a response to Kimmel's lawsuit threat and attack of Rodgers on Jimmy Kimmel Live. And, predictably, even though no evidence emerged of Kimmel being associated with Epstein, instead of apologizing, what did Rodgers do? He doubled down. He said he wasn't stupid enough to make those accusations if he didn't have evidence. Or, in other words, implying that he had evidence of this, which is another damaging lie here. So that's essentially what happens, or what happened. Now, I have two main points I want to make. One of them is about what might happen with McAfee and ESPN, but I'll get to that in a minute. I'll start with this. Why on earth does anybody take Aaron Rodgers seriously? Right, Jimmy Kimmel pointed this out on his show on Monday, but Rodgers suffers from the same thing that so many rich, famous, successful people do, which is that because they have success in this one area, they must know everything about every topic, right? We see it with Elon Musk, we see it with Kanye West, we've seen it with Joe Rogan. So many people do this. Rodgers essentially thinks because he's able to throw a ball really well, that he must be blessed with this just amazing knowledge and talent and all that. But in reality, Rodgers went to community college, got into Cal, solely because he was able to play football, got in on a scholarship, and did not graduate. But no, he definitely knows more about vaccines than medical experts who have spent their whole life studying them, something he keeps bringing up over and over, and instead promoting a horse dewormer as something that someone should take to fight COVID, because that's what he found online, so it must be true, right? This guy does not know what he's talking about with vaccines because he's not an immunologist. He's not a doctor. None of that. And yet he still thinks that he knows better than anyone else. And then he lied about his vaccine status too back in 2020. And then when he got COVID and predictably told everyone, and everyone was upset, rightfully so. And now he's like, well, you can't judge me fairly if you're vaxxed because it means you're against me. No, it's not about this. This is about you being a deeply unserious person. He's gone completely off the deep end. He's lied about everything. I mentioned the vaccine stuff. But he also says he doesn't care what people think about him. Okay, well then why, when you went on the Pat McAfee show, did you bring up all the things that people have said about you that hurt you? You aired your grievances about Nick Wright, about Ryan Fitzpatrick, about Jimmy Kimmel, about everyone who may have wronged you with their words. But apparently I'm supposed to believe that he doesn't care what these people think about him. Right? His ego's so big, he can't possibly apologize for this incident, or else that would deal a fatal blow to his ego. And whatever happened to the whole thing about, oh, I'm going to come back this year? Oh yeah, right. That was just a ploy to keep himself relevant. But once he can't use that anymore, he just finds a crappy TV host who will platform him no matter what he says, ideally will pay him millions of dollars to appear on his show, as Pat McAfee does, and then start spouting BS to someone who said about someone who said something mean to you, and you claim that they are a pedophile, which is how you know that the word pedophile no longer means anything to these people. The right wing they've just used it to describe people that they don't like, similar to how they've used the word woke. You don't like someone? Oh, they must be associated with Epstein. Someone made a joke about you that you don't like? Probably a pedophile. You see where I'm going with this? They use this rhetoric to describe anyone who disagrees with them, and that has no place in our political discourse, though I guess I could see why the far right wants to take meaning away from the word pedophile. After all, Donald Trump, their hero, has been credibly accused of raping children, and it feels like every other day we hear about some evangelical leader getting arrested for child sex abuse, so it's not real surprising that Republicans don't actually care about pedophilia. And let's also talk about the point that Rodgers and everyone that's supporting him makes. They say that Kimmel does the same thing to them because he tells mean jokes about them. Well, that's pretty different from calling somebody a pedophile without evidence, something that Kimmel has never done because in the TV industry, there's a little something we call standards. Kimmel's talked about this on his show. They have a team of people that make sure that they don't spread false information, and if they do, they quickly apologize. Rodgers has never done that. He doesn't fact-check his stuff, and he sure as hell doesn't apologize for any of it. Not that he has to care about TV standards, because he'll never go on an actual TV show where he might get fact-checked. Instead, he sticks to the flaming pile of garbage that is the Pat McAfee show, where he can go on and on about whatever the latest conspiracy theory is, while saying he's being cancelled despite being on live national television, and all the while, Pat McAfee sits there laughing, and AJ Hawk sits there saying nothing and just looking like a dumbass with all these books that may or may not be real sitting behind him, with the spine facing in, just like how books aren't supposed to be placed on a bookshelf. The entire show is a complete and total joke. And that finally brings me to the ESPN aspect of all this. As McAfee now announcing Wednesday morning, Rodgers is done with his appearances for the season, but refusing to say that he is done appearing on the show at all. But if you're ESPN, how do you allow Rodgers to remain on air? Right? He attacked one of Disney's biggest stars. Again, ESPN is a Disney network. And even if you forget the whole defamation aspect of it for a minute, it's not even good TV. ESPN. This is the company who used to go on and on about, oh, you better stick to sports, or else you might get fired, right? Jamel Hill got suspended for anti-Trump comments, not because of the substance of the comments, but because it was talking about politics in the first place. They have a stick to sports mandate, but now Rodgers just comes on their air to not talk about sports, but to discuss the most wacko conspiracy theories out there. Something about UFOs and Epstein and pedophiles and vaccines and all the garbage that's just completely unhinged. And at ESPN, as a TV network, they have a responsibility to their viewers to not platform this stuff. But apparently, they just don't care about that because it's apparently really good for ratings. So, Jamila Hill probably owed an apology now because she wouldn't have been suspended for not sticking to sports if apparently she just had really good ratings. But McAfee, they don't have any sort of creative control over. He seems to not report to anybody because they just gave him complete creative control over his show, and they can't get rid of him because they signed him to a 5-year, $85 million contract. And until Disney proves otherwise, Charlie, nothing is more important to them than that.
No, it is not.
I need a breath.